up!
Yeah? No worries. Good evening, everyone. So it's a privilege to be here today, and this especially because this is the very first Sapper Gathering. And I'm excited to sort of speak to you all about my book and my experiences from Afghanistan. For those who do not know me, my name is Bradley Knight, and I am the author of Brimstone that you can see up here. But that's not to be confused with the much more famous one by Kelly Hart, because mine's slightly less romantic. Now, Brimstone is actually, it's the first public account about Royal Engineer search teams in Afghanistan written by an actual searcher. Now, searchers never really got a lot of attention, and that's because as searchers, we sort of worked in the background. And when the job went well, it was pretty boring and uneventful, and it was only when the job went wrong that searchers was ever really noticed. Now, I've got the utmost respect for ATOs and the job that they do, but the reality is it's not really the full picture of what actually goes on, because before an ATO ever gets down to a device, it's got to be found, and that is where us as Royal Engineer search teams, we come in. Because it's search teams that find the device, it's search teams that clear the ground, it's search teams that make that approach possible. And for the most part of the story, background. So that is a big part of sort of why I ended up writing the book, Brimstone, because initially I never really set out to sort of write a book. It's something that just started off like very informal. I started writing on and off bits over sort of a period of 3 years. I didn't really have any plan or any intention of releasing this publicly. But I did end up releasing it publicly. I sent a few copies out to people who I knew, people who I trusted, to sort of get their feedback and see what they thought of the book before I put it out into the world. And every single one of them, they come back to me and they said, listen, Brad, you need to release this book. So that's what I did. I spoke to the lads at Team Stallion, and I had to make sure that all of these were happy with it, because at the end of the day, it wasn't just my story, it was our story as a team. Now, at the time, I didn't have many friends. I only had 300 friends on Facebook. And I put the post out there to sort of confirm and see if people would actually be interested in this. And of the 300 friends, 120 people shared it. So at that point, it became clear to me that people wanted to hear this story. But more importantly, you know, it was to get the story of Brimstone and what actually went on out there into the world. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you insight into that journey and sort of where it started. I'm going to talk about a couple of the experiences that have shaped me sort of as a person and what went on in that tour. Now, I've got to go back to the very beginning, because I joined the army at 16, and like most people in the army, I grew up on a council estate in Salford in Manchester, and there wasn't really a lot going on. I didn't have any direction. I didn't want to go to college. There was no jobs that sort of looked at me and said, I want to do that. At that time, the army sort of seemed like the best option available to me. So at 16, off I went, much to like my mother's dismay, and she didn't think I was going to be lasting very long, but I disappointed her. Yeah. Now, I joined in 2006, and looking at the audience here, it's a little bit of an older cohort, so I know what you're all thinking, Sprog. But, but like most people, like I said before, I went down to Basenborn, which at 16 years old, it's a completely different world. You sort of get a culture shock, and you go from being at home, being around your friends and family, to being in this like structured environment where everything has a standard and everything matters. And at that age, it sort of hits you pretty quickly. From there on, like most of yous, I went to Gibraltar Barracks, and then I went to my first posting, which was 36 Engineer Regiment down in Maidstone. There, one cheer. And this is where things started to move sort of very fast, because I turned up, I was still 17 when I turned up at the regiment. I was still very much finding my feet, and I was still very much like trying to figure out what the army actually was. And within 2 weeks of being there, I was told, you're going to Afghanistan, and I was straight on to pre-deployment training. Now, there wasn't really time to think about it. There was no sort of easing in period. It was just straight into doing the job. That moment where you sort of go from being new and in training to suddenly being expected just to get on with the job, and you're expected to know what happens. That was the beginning of my army career. So my first tour, which is not what the book's about, was actually Op Herrick 7, 2007, 2008. And like I said, I was very young, was still finding my feet, and I didn't know what the army was like beyond training. And you go out there and you have this idea of what you think operations are going to look like. And within about 5 minutes of getting there, you understand it's nothing like you've sort of imagined before, and you've got everything completely wrong, because the environment sort of hits you straight away. You have the heat, the dust, the smell, the pace of everything that is going on around you. It's completely different to anything I'd experienced before, and I was just trying to take it all in. Now, at this time, I wasn't Search. I was just another young sapper trying to do my job and doing what I was told. But looking back now, it was probably the perfect first tour for me. Because, yeah, there we go. I got out into like the patrol bases. I was working alongside like the infantry, and I was doing some proper combat engineering, building fobs, putting in infrastructure, building roads, you know, all the stuff that sort of keeps operations moving. But more importantly, I got exposed to like the reality of being on tour and being in war. I got shot at for the first time, so incoming rocket attacks. In the grand scheme of things, it wasn't nothing too serious compared to later on. But it gave me an understanding of like, this was not training anymore. This was very real. And the key thing about that tour is it gave me sort of exposure without completely overwhelming me. Now, after Herrick 7, we went back and the regiment went back into this sort of normal routine. But meanwhile, in Afghanistan, the tempo and everything was forever increasing. And alongside that, the IED threat was growing, and it was rapidly evolving. Now, because of that, 36 Engineer Regiment, we ended up re-rolling into a Search Regiment at the time. And the first two teams deployed on Herrick 11, the tour before us. Now, as a squadron, 50 Squadron, if anyone's been there, we only had to provide one team, and the rest of the regiment, there was another 5 teams trolled out from the regiment. So essentially, the team commander, Big Andy Oren on the left there, who's running the London Marathon, as we spoke about earlier, tomorrow, he essentially got to pick his own team, and word got around the block very quickly. And as you can imagine, everyone wants to go on tour, everyone. Like, it's why you join the army. So obviously, I put my name forward, although if you would have asked my wife at the time, I was told I didn't volunteer. But it's probably worth explaining before I go any further what sort of Search is actually about, because most people think it's just looking for IEDs, and that is not really true. Because we were trained to sort of search anything and everything: routes, buildings, compounds, vehicles, people, confined spaces. The list is actually endless. So yeah, IEDs was a big part of what we were doing in Afghanistan, but we could have easily have been searching for like weapons caches, bomb making equipment, pretty much anything. But search as a discipline, it actually goes back quite a long way. And it started in like places like Palestine, but later on it was refined in Northern Ireland, which would have been probably more of your era. And what we was doing in Afghanistan was those same skills and drills. It was just adapted to this new environment and this new threat. Now, not before long, I'd found myself on the actual search course for deploying to Afghanistan for what would be my second tour. And to be honest, it turned out that I had a bit of a knack for searching. Everything just sort of seemed to click. I seemed to be picking things up early, picking up on those little details. And most of the time, I got it right in training, except for this one time. Now, we was out on a training serial doing exactly what we would have been doing on tour. Nice search, steady, doing all the skills and drills correctly. And we got to the end of the task, and the DS, he says to us, "Are you happy with the search?" We're like, "Yeah, happy." Now, we didn't find anything on the actual search, but they didn't always put devices out. Sometimes they just wanted to see you go through the skills and drills. So we wasn't too bothered until he said, "Follow me." So then we went back down the track about 200 metres, and he peeled back a patch of grass. And there was a pressure plate IED buried in the ground. And he turned to me and he said, "This is on your side." I was like, "I fucked up here." But he didn't shout and he didn't kick off, although it was serious. He just sort of let the moment sit with me. He turned around and he said to me, "Listen, you are deploying to Afghanistan soon." He said, "Potentially, you've just killed yourself and injured some of your teammates. At the very least, you've lost a limb." And that was it. There was not like no big drama about it. He just let that mistake sit with me. And then was coming in on the Monday, and it was actually test week for the course. So I was nervous, but clearly I went on and smashed it. Now, with the search course done, we moved into pre-deployment training, and we went away to prepare for a summer tour in Afghanistan in what felt like the complete opposite conditions. It was in Salisbury Plain in January, knee-deep snow. It was mad. Like, you could literally see footprints going up to a device, a ruffle of snow, and then footprints like leading away. But what it did teach us, though, however, is the ability to operate in these sort of harsh environments. Yeah, it wasn't the same conditions, but obviously we had to dig deep and do things a little bit differently and adapt. And later on, that would come in handy in Afghanistan. Then, not long before we deployed, we was called into the gymnasium and we was addressed by the CO. See, one of the search teams that had previously deployed on Herrick 11 had suffered a KIA. And it was WO2 Dave Markland. And he'd stepped on an IED while his team was clearing a route. And that was a shock to me, especially because he was a RESA. He was a search advisor. So he wasn't even the one doing the searching. He wasn't the person who was meant to be most at risk. So if it could happen to him, someone who was that experienced, then it could happen to absolutely any single one of us. Then about a week later, we was called back into the gym again for a second time. And the second team that had deployed from the regiment had also suffered a KIA. And this time, it was Sapper Gathering. And that made it sort of very real because this is the exact job that I was going out to do. We had two teams deployed and two teams had both suffered a KIA. And at that moment, it sort of stopped being about something that we was training for and that it was something I knew I was about to go out and face. And this was probably 6 weeks before we deployed. So now the training was done and it was just a waiting game, getting ready to deploy. You know, at the time I was 20 years old on my second tour. I was living on the married quarters at Brompton Barracks and I had a wife and two young kids. You know, and when you deploy, it never really gets any easier. So then we moved on and we landed in theatre. And like I said before, that heat, that dust, that smell, it's different to sort of anything you've experienced before. And you get a week to do some training, acclimatise, but before you know it, that is gone and you're out on the ground and you're doing the job. Now, I remember we flew into Fob Shawkat for our first place where we went. And as we was getting off the helicopter, the search team, the outgoing search team was coming onto the helicopter and they was high-fiving us. And that moment stuck with me because we was just like beginning our journey into search. They'd finished and they was on their way home. Now, up until this point, I'd been the lead searcher throughout training. Now, lead searcher isn't really an official title, but the reality is it's that person who is at the front, the one who is most exposed, the one who's searching and taking the most risk. If you're searching a route and it's a side that's assessed to have more of a threat, generally the lead searcher would be put onto that side. When we arrived on the ground, our team commander, he already knew exactly who he wanted in that position. But as a good commander, instead of just pointing at someone and saying, "You're the lead searcher," he asked who is going to be the lead searcher. And the truth is, he already knew exactly who it would be and who would step forward. And straight away, when he asked the question, I could feel all of the eyes from the other lads in the team on me. Yeah. And from that moment, that just sort of became my place and my job role. But recently, I spoke to him and I asked him why he chose me as the lead searcher. And he said there was a few reasons for it. He said, because I had the confidence and the willingness to step forward and understand what was being asked, and I took it on without hesitation. But in that job role, he said it mattered because it wasn't just about doing my job role, it was sort of setting the tone for everyone else behind me, because by me stepping forward, it also enabled them and it gave them the confidence to also move forward. The second reason was pretty simple. He said he believed because I was the best searcher throughout training and I had a knack for noticing these small things, picking up on these little details and making quick sound like decisions. Because as a lead searcher, often you're out at the front on your own and you've not got that commander behind you telling you sort of what to do or what you can see. He can't see what you can see. So he's got to have the utmost sort of confidence in that person to be able to pass that sort of information back. The ability to assess risk in real time and adapt and do the job role was absolutely critical in this job. But more than that, he said it come down to trust because there was an understanding sort of between us. But he knew when I needed a break and he'd take me off the task when I needed a break and he'd put someone else. But he knew exactly when I was ready and he'd put me back into that job role. In the end, he summed it up simply. I was a lead searcher because I was the best in his eyes for that role at that time. Now, the main threat we was dealing with in Afghanistan and the Taliban's weapon of choice was the low metal content pressure plate, IED. Now, earlier on in the campaign, the devices had been metallic and it was getting picked up pretty easy. So the Taliban decided to make these, and instead of having metal in them, they'd have these graphite rods which would be extracted from batteries, which you can see on the top picture in the corner, or maybe they might just put copper wire running through it, because these would not be picked up by the standard metal detectors that they was using at the time, like the Velen. We did end up getting issued some newer detectors, but we only got 2 per team, and there was 4 searchers, so you can sort of do the maths on that, you know. The way the device worked was pretty simple. It was essentially a circuit. It was 2 pieces of wood with copper wire running through them, or the graphite rods. And when someone either stood on it or a vehicle went over it, it'd connect and it'd complete a circuit. That'd send a signal to the detonator, which set off the main charge. Now, there was a little bit of metal in these, and it was a 9-volt battery. Now, we know they're only small, but also, more important than that, they used to actually remote them away from the devices, so they wasn't actually with the devices themselves. So you're not really relying on the equipment, you're relying on your eyes and reading the ground, and you're trying to spot things that don't belong there. Now, it didn't take long before I found my first IED, and I remember it pretty vividly. It was a 2-kilometre route search, and I was on what we call the hedgerow, so that would be the side of the road. And I remember as I was searching up to an area, you know, and I've got the other lads behind me in search formation. And they probably wasn't as confident at the time. I'd had more hands-on doing the searching on the other tasks and a little bit more confident. So they was a little bit slower. But as we started approaching this area, I noticed there's some blatant, what we call ground sign disturbance on the ground. It's like a very faint scarring, and it was going down towards the bank. And as I'm searching along, I looked at it and I thought, this has the potential to sort of be an IED here. So I communicated back to the team and I said, look, lads, slow down. I've got something here. I'm not sure if it's an IED yet, but let's just slow down so obviously I can check it thoroughly. As I got closer, sort of, it became blatantly obvious that there was more to it going on here. So instead of going straight to the actual pressure plate that you can see Andy's holding there, I stopped and I thought, where's the battery going to be? I want to locate this battery rather than the pressure plate. And that was for two reasons. The battery's not going to set off the device. The pressure plate is. Also, I can pick the battery up with my detector. So I searched down the bank and I got a hit on my detector. So I said to the lads, right, let's stop here. And they all sort of took cover. Next thing you know, I'm laying on my belt buckle and take out my bayonet, because the ground is rock solid. So you have to break up the ground with the bayonet. And then from there on, you can sort of start inching up towards the device slowly, either with like a paintbrush or something to remove the dirt, or fingertip searching. And I remember I just uncovered a corner of a battery. And as a searcher, that is enough. That is your job done. So I just shout at the top of my voice, find! And everything just stopped for a moment. Everything just went quiet. And then Andy popped into action and he dragged the other lads back first. And then he brought me back last. But yeah, I got back into the ICP, the safe area. And everyone was sort of congratulating me. But the weird feeling for me is it did not feel any different to what I've been doing in training. I'd done it a million times before. But what it did do for us as a team and for the other lads, it now proved that we can find IEDs and we're not going out there nervous thinking, are we going to find them? It's completely different. Finding one in training and then finding one and having the confidence then to move forward afterwards. Now, the technical side of search is only half of the job. The real challenge sort of sits in your head. Because in that environment, you have to accept the reality of what you are walking into. Because it's something you can't ignore. You can't just push it to the back of your mind. You have to come to terms with the fact that there is a genuine risk to your life every single time you step out on task. And that includes uncomfortable scenarios like thinking about your own mortality and being mentally prepared for that outcome. Now, it sounds maybe a little bit heavy, but that level of acceptance is what allows you to function. Because if you're constantly trying to suppress your emotions, it will, for me, it would affect my judgment and I'd lose focus. So you learn to compartmentalize these emotions, because in that environment, you don't have the time or the ability to be able to process everything in real time. So you have to switch off certain feelings and certain emotions, and later on, when it is safe to do so, you'll deal with those emotions. Now, it sort of becomes a coping mechanism, and it becomes second nature, and it just happens automatically. But that instinct allows you to remain effective in situations and have clarity and concentration where it's critical. You know, in hindsight, you begin to understand how much of yourself you put to one side in order just to get the job done. A few days later, after finding my first IED, we found our second IED, and we also rolled a Mastiff into a ditch, sort of starting to heat up a little bit, and teams were going out on operations, but that sort of meant one thing, that casualties from within the group started rolling in. The first was a TA soldier who'd lost both of his legs. 2 days later, two lads from the regiment got shot by a sniper with the same round through the foot. And the team commander won a military cross in the process. Now, I can't really do a talk without talking about the Day of Days. So the Day of Days, this was our ATO Woody. He won a military cross on a job that we got called out to. And the job started, was in Shawcat, and it was very late in the day. We'd already wound down. We thought there's no chance we're going to be getting a job now at this time. Someone come running into the tent. We got a job on. But it was quite far away, so a Chinook come to pick us up, and it drops us off at a PB. We got to the PB, and it turns out a Mastiff had hit an IED, and the infantry lads think they found another 2 devices in front. So the site was 1.5 kilometres away. So I had to search up to the Mastiff 1.5 kilometres away, and I got about halfway through the search, and he heard behind me, "Brad." Like, who's that speaking to me? "Brad." Turned round. If you look over there now, Mikey Cullis, put your hand up. It was him speaking. He said, "Fucking switch on and start searching properly." Right? He was my 2IC at the time. Right? And in my head, I thought, you cheeky. Like, I'm up here searching. I'm doing it my way. Like, don't tell me how to search. But he was absolutely right. Maybe I'd just become a little bit sort of relaxed, and there was a little bit of a rush to get up to the site. So I ended up listening to him anyway. But as we approached the site, there was 2 vehicles. The first one had been hit by an IED, and there was one behind. And we got up to it, and there was a safe area, the ICP, which had already been established by the infantry. And as I got there, the search advisor, he turns around and he says, "Right, we're not going to research this ICP." That was a drill we always did as a team. We was the subject matter experts, the infantry not, but it was getting dark. There's a Mastiff that's been hit and another 2 IEDs in front of it. So he had to sort of make a call at the time. The rearmost Mastiff was parked to the left-hand side of the road, and on the left-hand side of the road there was a canal, and on the right-hand side there was a wall, and there was a big gap between the wall and the Mastiff. So the team commander, he says to me, "Right, you're Valens way, cross over to the other side of the road and we'll go down that side." Now this is an important bit of information for you to call back on later within this story. We moved into the ICP and we got chatting to the infantry. Yeah, potential 2 devices in front. Vehicle's been hit. We've been taking incoming fire all day, continuously. Right, sound, let's crack on. So we do what is called an isolation, and effectively it's a 360 around the affected area where the device is at thought to be, and the vehicle had been blown up. But you have obstacles within these isolations which you need to get over, and the main one in Afghanistan for us was compound walls. So we used to use ladders to climb over the compound walls and get down the other side. We got over the first wall absolutely fine, and I climbed up and I was sat on top of the wall waiting for my partner behind me to pass me the set of ladders. Now, if anyone's been shot at here before, they'll know distinctively the sound when a round passes you. So you'll hear a crack, but when it's really close, you don't hear a crack, you hear a whiz. And I heard a whiz and it was close to me. So I sort of flung myself off this wall, and I was a little bit winded, but I was fine. We had a little bit of a giggle. The infantry then sort of went on to deal with the situation, and 5 minutes later it comes over the radio. "Right, lads, you can carry on. Brad, you need to get over the wall." "Yeah, no problem." Climbed up the ladder, popped my head up. As soon as I popped my head up, rounds opened up again. So I climbed back down, and we all sat behind the wall and we thought, this is shit. We're getting out of here. Yeah. But guess what? 5 minutes later, it come over the radio again. "It's clear now, you can get over." So I'm the team commander, he turns to me, he said, "Come on then, Brad." I said, "Fuck off, I'm not going." he says, "Listen, you're the lead searcher, you need to set the example." He was right, to be fair. We had a bit of a joke about potentially putting helmets on rifles and poking them up. We never did none of that, I promise you. But eventually, I got up onto the wall. Now, we actually have a drill. We're supposed to search the other side of the wall and on the floor. It's quite hard to do because it's the other side of a wall. But On this occasion, I'd been getting shot at and I had to weigh up the threat at the time. So I had to think, is it worth me staying up on top of this wall, trying to search it? I had a quick look on the other side. It seemed to me a good place. There wasn't any ground sign. I didn't think there would be any IEDs here. So I weighed up the risk and I didn't search it. I quickly got over the wall. And then once it was over, I searched it. It turned out to be the right decision, clearly, because I'm still here. And we didn't get shot at for the rest of the isolation, I believe. We got back in and we'd spotted a couple areas in front. It turns out there was 3 devices in front of the blown up Mastiff. We'd spotted, and the 8-0 Woody, he's then gone forward to deal with them. He's dealt with the first 2, he blew them up, he's took the forensics and all that sort of good stuff. Couple pop shots here and there, shot at again while he was down at the site. And then on the 3rd device, he was only a small bloke. He couldn't get it out the ground. He'd attached a hook and line kit to it, and he was trying to pull it out. So because he couldn't pull it out, he enlisted the help of myself and another searcher. But what we didn't know is he'd wrapped the rope around his hand, and then he said, 1, 2, 3, pull. And we pulled the rope, and I just heard a scream. And at the time, we thought he'd broke his hand. So he put his hand in a splint, but now we've got a bomb in front, and we've got no aid. So he said, I'm still going to go down to it and deal with it with the one hand, but he's not going to try and extract the forensics from it. He's not going to mess about with it. He's just going to blow it up in place where it is. So that's what he did. He blew it up in place. But now it was pretty much dark and we had to get back to the patrol base. So I got pulled off searching. I've been searching all day. I'd searched the way up. I'd done the isolation and everything else. So Andy, the team commander, he made the right decision. I'm going to pull you off, Brad. Clearly, you're knackered. You've been searching all day. We're going to put one of the other lads at front. He said, we're going to set off from within inside the ICP. And the lad, he was called Flash, who was searching up. He probably took about 2 or 3 steps and he went, I think I've got something here. And we was all like, he's not got nothing. There's no devices. Everyone's been walking around here all day. The infantry had searched it. Turns out there was another pressure plate IED behind us, and there's 2 infantry lads sat about 10 metres away on part of the cordon who just turned white. And earlier on, where I said I'd crossed the road over, we must have been, 2 or 3 steps from walking forward. And every single man in that patrol, was about 20 of us, followed my exact footsteps somehow. I mean, that day, how nothing sort of bad happened that day was beyond me. But Woody ended up winning a military cross anyway on this day. And it was very much deserved so, diffused 4 IEDs, 2 with one hand, and was continuously why he was getting shot at. So, yeah, another highlight of the tour for us was working alongside the BRF. Those who do not know what the BRF is, that is the Brigade Reconnaissance Force. And these are the cool guys who are sort of going out doing these tasks that everyone wants to do, getting dropped sort of behind enemy lines and doing all the cool jobs. Now, this was an opportunity for us as a team to go and do some proper soldiering, and this operation would see us do exactly that. See, we flew in darkness on the American Sea Stallions, and literally from the first day, we started taking incoming fire, and it was pretty much 5-6 times a day, just sporadic contact. And the longer we was there, the more intense they got, and the more it sort of happened. Now, this was our main sentry point. That is me on the right-hand side. And as you can see, it was sort of hastily built with sandbags. And we, like I said, we'd get into multiple contacts throughout the day on there. And this is what it looked like up on that roof. The first searcher, he went up and he did a stag, a sentry, and he got contacted, and I think he managed to get something like 10 rounds down off a GPMG jumper, and he come down, he was gobbing off to everyone. I've got some rounds down, don't you have? The next stag, another lad went up and he got contacted, and he got quite a few more rounds down. And then he come back down and they was bantering between themselves. I've got more rounds down than you. Yeah, so it was like a little bit of a banter, because we've all been military. You all sort of, as weird as it sounds, you want to get involved in these sort of confrontations or these incidents because that's what you've trained to do sort of your whole life, you know. And then the next day I went up onto the stag position, and there was only half an hour these stags. And for the first 20 minutes it was pretty boring. But the last 10 minutes was not boring, as I'll go into detail now. Now, the small red circle, this was a firing point, and they had what we call murder holes in the wall. And they dig out maybe a hole big enough to just stick a rifle muzzle through. That way they can fire, they can get rounds down, and they're pretty safe from returning fire. Now, the big circle is a wooden gate, and I would see and notice them, the Taliban, moving across this wooden gate. And I was sat on the GPMG, and there was a sniper lad sat up with me at the time during this contact. And I was suppressing this sort of murder hole area when I noticed them moving across. And then one of the Taliban fighters had come along, and they got to the gate, and they took a knee, and they started firing. Now, I don't know if you can see it, but some of these twigs on this tree are snapped. Yeah, that's from incoming and outgoing rounds. That's sort of how close they was. And he took up fire position, he started firing at me, so I just fired a burst of rounds in that general direction, and you just seen him sort of, he hit the floor straight away. And I remember the sniper lad, and he just shouted to me, you've just smashed him. And I just sort of acted on instinct and training. I didn't really think about it. It just happens sort of when something like that happens in the moment, you just have to act. And that's exactly sort of what I did. And then after the stag, I come down and I remember all the lads was around, and he was all sort of like congratulating me. And it was so surreal and it was so weird. Like, people was congratulating you. You just took someone's life, and like, you don't have a second to sort of think about it or think about what you've just done or what just has happened. You know? Yeah, so, yeah. On that same operation, we also went to a suspected bomb-making factory. We got there at a very early dawn, you know, ready to go in, first light. And I was the first person to search up for it. On the way down there, spray painted a safe lane, and literally, as I got to the compound, it was blatantly obvious that it sort of been used for like nefarious activities. See, we couldn't see any actual IEDs, but there was like burnt patches around, and this is what they do. They burn the batteries to extract the graphite rods. There's containers around with like little bits of homemade explosives in them, but there was no like smoking gun. There's a pile of stuff here for us to find at that time. The compound was fully searched, and we'd found probably little bits like, I think it was like SIM cards, small bits of like paperwork and equipment. But like I said, there was nothing there which was like a smoking gun. But we'd not been into this room yet. This door was locked, so we'd saved this for last. So we entered this the only way you would expect a sapper to enter it. Yeah. Yeah. Clearly. And then once we was inside, it was evident there was quite a lot of bomb-making equipment, you know. So to sort of give you an idea, we found like medical supplies, fertilizer, homemade explosives, copper wire, detonators, pressure plates. There was all sorts of stuff in there. Yeah. But anyway, this was the end result of the compound. You know, clearly we added a little bit extra along to help it. No one wanted to be carrying bar mines back, so he was gone. Yeah. So yeah, that's what happened. Now this is a team Stallion, and alongside it, our IED team at the time, and this is the lads who dealt with that bomb-making factory and that operation. Now listen, I've got plenty more stories, But one, we'd be here all day, and two, none of you would then go buy my book. So I'm not going to tell you them all. But now the tour was sort of coming to an end, and there was no better feeling than sort of being flown back to camp. Now, at the end of sort of Op Herrick 12, I don't know the exact figures, but this is sort of what got bandied around. It was more than 20 teams had deployed on this tour. That's how high the threat was. At the end of the tour, there was 5 teams that come back as fully teams as they deployed. That was for a few reasons. Injuries, obviously KIAs, and there was a couple other sort of incidents where people get moved around. But the point I'm trying to make is that my story isn't special amongst search. All the other search teams did these amazing things that we did as well. It just so happens to be that I'm the first person to talk about it and put the story out there. Now, sort of all these years later after leaving Afghanistan, I sort of still find myself reflecting on what it meant to sort of be there at that time, because like most soldiers, I sort of believed in the mission. It was pretty simple. We was there to sort of fight terrorism, stabilise a country, help and protect people. But over time, that clarity sort of fades and you start asking yourself questions like, what did we actually achieve and what was the true cost? Because the cost is something we can't ignore. There was 457 British service personnel who lost their lives. And many come home carrying not just physical injuries, but sort of psychological scars as well. But beyond that, Afghan civilians and families was also caught in there, and communities were torn apart. And they was left dealing with the consequences of a war that lasted nearly 2 decades. Financially, we spent billions on it, but the real cost has always sort of been human. Now, on the ground, my role was search. It was finding IEDs, and there's no doubt that work saved lives, But I remember watching the withdrawal of Afghanistan and the rapid return of the Taliban, and that sort of brought a lot of these thoughts and moments to the surface. I remember watching everything sort of unravel really quickly. And I started questioning myself, whether the outcome actually matched the sacrifice. But the one thing I think now is, even though that happened, it doesn't take away from the professionalism and the courage and the integrity of the people who served there. But it does obviously force you to reflect on it. In closing, what I really wanted to get across to you and for you to understand is not just the technical side of search and looking for IEDs, but the mindset also that sort of has to come along with it. Because, behind that mindset is patience, discipline, responsibility, and sort of this constant awareness of what you're doing has real consequences. Because that role, it demands utmost attention. So effectively, what I wanted to do is just make you aware of what search is and think about the people who served within that role, especially sort of within that time frame and that environment. That is the end of the talk. If you do have any questions, Nick surely is going to come up and ask me a couple anyway. My book is available on Amazon. I do still have a few left. I don't have many left though. If you want to catch me anywhere else, social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, anything like that. Either search Brimstone or Bradley Knight, Hey. But yeah, thank you.